Good morning. This is the October 19th, 2022 Finance Committee meeting for the Lee Summit R7 School District. We'll begin with item 1.01, contracts $15,000 or less. Any questions? As with last month, if you take a moment to open up the agenda item, you'll notice there are a number of items here related to activities that are going on in the buildings, as well as additional supports for classrooms. There are a number of budget managers who oversee this work, and just want to acknowledge the efforts they're making to provide supplies and other services that support our students and support our staff. Hearing no questions, we'll move on to the next item, 1.02, contracts greater than 15,000. We do have some items that we'll highlight here in just a moment, but just wanted to give the board members an opportunity to ask any questions about any items that are on this list. And once again, we do have some of these items that we will highlight here in just a moment. All right, not hearing any, we will move on to our next agenda item, 1.03, IXL additional resources. I believe either Eric or Melanie are on the call this morning to help with this. I'm not sure which of the two are going to address this. Board members, any questions that you might have?
I think in talking with one of the other board members, and I know we don't have board questions and answers back out yet, but I think there was a question about varying levels between different schools. So maybe just a little bit additional context on, what the needs are at each school and how we're addressing those needs.
Sure, great question. I can answer that. So for math, we've purchased this for all of the buildings as a standard as part of our core instructional resource implementation. Once it was in those buildings, some social studies teachers started looking at it, that the resources that are available for social studies, some English teachers started looking at it. And so at that point, it becomes an approved supplemental resource. It's not a core that we provide everyone, but at individual buildings, there are always those, these are the district provided resources that everyone gets. And then buildings have some autonomy with some individual dollars to decide, well, our teachers would like to use this or that. And so that's why this is coming back. Bernard Campbell's already purchased for their teachers. East Trails and Summit Lakes had decided that they wanted to do it for social studies for one building and social studies and ELA for another building.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and just as an FYI, this as part of trying to smooth out that purchase and ensure it didn't mess with our district-wide licenses. That's why this is coming together. Otherwise, they would have submitted these separately by the individual buildings, but just for ease of purchasing and ease of making sure that the licenses don't conflict with one another, we packaged it all up together, and that's why it hit that threshold that would be the over 15,000.
Mr. Flack, thank you so much. Moving on to item 1.04, Heartland School Solutions.
Good morning. We have this on the board packet this month. In 2019, we upgraded our software system for front of the house and back of the house. We've been with Heartland for probably 20 years, and we were then using NutriKids, and NutriKids was becoming obsolete, so we upgraded to Mosaic. At that time, we went the back of the house, we went with cloud, and with talking with technology, they wanted to keep the front of the house on our server. Well, things have changed in the last few years, and security has gotten better, and our server is maintained by our technology department for nutrition services, and we've had a lot of issues our support from Heartland is not able to access our server. So if we have glitches with free and reduced applications not going through, or our My School Bucks and all those programs, they aren't able to help us. So then we have to rely on our technology department. And I spoke with Kevin Whaley about moving to the cloud program for front of the house, and he was 100% on board. And we are wanting to do this around Christmas break because we have to have 3 solid days of not using our system. And this will help all of our information flow a lot easier. Our support from Mosaic will be there 24/7. And this is just going to be an improvement in our technology. And we're hoping to speed up our serving lines, because with it being in the cloud, there's not going to be hangups on our updates and our transfers daily. Any questions? And I'll add to, this comes out of nutrition's budget. This does not come out of the district's budget. So that will be absorbed by our department.
And as a reminder, our nutrition service budget is, the balances are very, very strong, very positive. Any additional questions?
I have one. Was there, it sounds like we were doing a lot of the work as far as like server updates ourselves. So what previously, so with moving to a cloud system, is there an annual increase? Like, is this going to increase the cost of whatever we were paying for this service before?
Yes, there will be an annual increase. We do get a discount on our yearly fee, and it will be prorated if we start in December, since we've already paid for our fee for this year. In my personal opinion, I think the charges are well worth it because of all the issues that we've had this year. Free and reduced information, we were having a really tough time of the applications not getting approved correctly. The emails weren't getting sent out to parents. And I just feel this is going to be, you know, a great improvement for our program.
Okay. Sounds like I would definitely agree with that. Can you just tell me about how much of a difference it's going to be year over year, just so I can make sure that I communicate that to the rest of the board?
Sure. On the annual subscription, it's going to be, the actual rate is $29,900, but we get a discount of $13,260 because we've been with the company, and we also have our back of the house. So it's going to be $16,640 per year.
Okay.
And
Gotcha.
that is support, and that's, I mean, that's all of our programs. We have My School apps, we have My School Bucks, we have our front of the house, and we have back of the house.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Any additional questions? Lori, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Moving on to item 1.05, Zuzu. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Melanie?
You pronounce it as well as I do. So, so Umzuzu is a renewal. We have been partners with Umzuzu for a long time, but this specific renewal was based around a broader purchase in 2020 during COVID. So this renewal actually renews the entire G Suite enterprise that we presently have. So that would not just include, I think people get a little misnomer that it's not just Google Meets, but it's certain functions of that are free to education, but then obviously there are certain functions that are not. So for us, the enhanced product that they had purchased back in 2020, and then again, this is what the renewal was before, was that backside. So the ability for analytics, making sure we can pull all those logs for either emails, participants in meets, the meet recordings, again, also those, the audit enforcement that we can do with that backside as well. So all of that includes that kind of back end stuff that we don't see outside of Google Meets to make sure it's safe. And then in addition to that, it's also a teacher upgrade for being able to look at like that classroom admin console additionally, and then be able to have more flexibility with that as well with this, that renewal.
Thank you, Melanie. Any questions?
I do have a question. So I'm just trying to understand how our educators are using this, because I could see this being super useful in a virtual classroom environment. Are teachers using like a polling Q&A and all of those things when the students are sitting right in front of them? I'm just curious.
They do. So this also extends just beyond Google Meets. It's also part of the enhancement for Google Drive as well. So sorry, that was my fault. And so like the usage logs for Drive. So anytime they're using, their sheets, their slides, their chat, all of that is in that feature, that paid feature that we have as well. But to answer your question, yes, we do have between our 7 Academy and then online, we have about 785 students that utilize between Schoology and Google Online as well. So they still utilize both, but this actually incorporates all of the security features for Drive as well.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you, Melanie. Moving on to section 2, facilities, 2.01. Contract, which was mentioned earlier. Kyle?
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is a contract with Hilliard that is actually working through a cooperative purchasing agreement. And this contract would allow us the service to what we call screen and recoat our gym floors. So they go and rough up the surface and put new floor finish on the gym floors. We do that once a year. And the cost for that comes out of the facilities department budget. Are there any questions I can answer on that contract? Right. Hearing none, I will move on to the next section on facilities. And if it's okay, these next 3 items go together. So I'd like to talk about them a little bit holistically. And really, this is a follow-up to the conversation that we had at the October 6th board workshop. The first item is a contract that's being recommended for the geometry and construction and robotics program. So just a big picture scope, this contract would build 2 buildings, one at north and one at west, that are approximately 7,000 square feet. Those buildings would house new build and practice space for the robotics team, as well as a classroom lab build space for the geometry and construction program. This contract would also provide a building addition onto the robotics space at Eastman High School to allow for that practice facility to be contained within their location. And then there was also some renovation to the PE athletics building to accommodate the geometry and construction program in that building. So this contract, this total project would be about a $12 million cost to the bond issue. You'll see the cost of the contract itself for the construction piece is about 11.2. And so if you wouldn't mind, I'm just going to roll through the other 2 and we'll just kind of talk about these, and I'll ask for questions when we get to the bond budget report. The next contract that weighs into this is the Paradise Park site program contract. And so as you remember, we awarded the Paradise Park early education program last month to Universal Construction. And there's approximately $2.1 million left in that budget. The additional site program bid came in at about 5.2, so slightly over that, quite a bit over that. The site program scope involves renovating the old fire station that sits on Colburn Road, and also supports the educational opportunities as kids work through that outdoor education program through fishing pond, nature trail, the walk that goes around, improvements to the pavilion, restroom facility, getting water back to the pavilion, number of things involved in supporting that program around the campus. So great opportunities for kids, and Missouri Department of Conservation's been involved, and it'll be a really exciting program. So we've got these two projects. We also have bond capital that was going to be used to support a long-range capital plan. So don't mind, I'd like to just roll over to the bond budget report. Thank you very much. And so what we presented on October 6th was the fact, looking through these different projects, there's approximately $19 million available in bond resources that are unallocated. So as we mentioned earlier, the geometry construction program is approximately $12 million. The additional site programs, adding in, that's a $5.2 million contract. And then there's general capital. We had initially planned about $8.5 million in general capital. And so, just doing the simple math, there's $6.7 million difference that would come out of that general capital. And so this will be, the discussion and decision for the board tomorrow night on how we want to prioritize this funds. So I'd be glad to answer any questions here today if you have them.
Kyle, thanks. I do have a couple of questions. I know we talked that evening in the work session with Dr. Barger, so that she'll be staged during our board meeting to do a presentation on the educational curriculum that'll be used for that outdoor space and the fire station. Is that still planned for tomorrow night?
That is planned, yes. Tomorrow night, we will present the geometry and construction agenda item first. Let the board decide on that. Then Dr. Barger will make a presentation over regarding the academic aspect of the Paradise Park outdoor space. And then we'll present that agenda item for your consideration.
Thank you. And then I know we talked a little bit about on our bond budget, breaking Paradise Park into 2 chunks. Can we see that update?
We will do that. It's not listed. It's not broken out on this report, but after tomorrow night's board meeting, we will make that delineation between those 2 projects. And something I want to highlight, and we've talked about this in the past, both the geometry and construction robotics project, as well as this project, the outdoor space at Paradise Park, are additional projects above and beyond what the voters approved and what we agreed to prior to the bond. So as we've talked about in the past, meeting our promises, which we've done in the past, but this is the add-on, the value added based on the bond premium that we received, as well as the interest and return that we've got on our investments, as well as just good fiscal management of our bond proceeds.
Great, excellent. Thanks so much to both you, Dr. Shelton and Kyle, for that. Thanks, I appreciate that.
You're welcome. And Kathy, just so you know, Nathan has the additional account code set up for that site program project if we need it, and it's ready to go in the next report.
Great, thank you.
All right, any additional questions? All right, moving on to section 3, finance. Mr. Holder.
Good morning, everyone. We, for the first time in FY23, have a transfer from Fund 1 to Fund 2. We, as you know, do not place a levy in the Special Revenue Fund. And so on a monthly basis, we regularly make that transfer, and that varies throughout the year. But in July, and then again in August, which it doesn't always happen in August, but this year it did, we did not have to make a transfer because we had enough revenue that came into Fund 2 to cover those expenses. But this month and then every month here forward until next July, we will be making a transfer from the general fund to the special revenue fund. So any questions on that? All right. The next item, if we want to start with the revenue and expense report, I would like to mention that the numbers you see here on estimated budget for revenue and expense are a reflection of our most recent amendment that was approved at the September board meeting. So those are updated. And then really what I'd like to do is highlight where we're at 3 months into the fiscal year, which I always caution at this point is still early. But we do have 2 certified teaching payrolls, which are, the largest payrolls, obviously, that we run throughout the year. So we have 2 out of 12 of those in our system, 3 months worth of operating expenses. So 25% of the year there. And so as we look at particularly expenses, that kind of starts to come into play more and more as we go throughout this fiscal year. But just want to start at the revenue. If we look at our operating fund and our special revenue and compare to last year, you'll see that operating is almost tracking exactly where we were at this point. Just remember that the majority of our operating funds will come in December and January. And so that's why that percentage seems very low, but that is very normal for this time of year for our district. And then the special revenue, which primarily that for us is our Prop C, our local, which is considered local revenue, but it's distributed by the state, as well as our basic formula money and classroom trust fund, which all goes into Fund 2. And so you see that reflected, and we're actually up a little bit percentage wise compared to last year's budget. So overall in operating, our revenue is just slightly up, which is always a good thing when comparing to the previous year. And then going across, you can see, again, tracks debt service is actually tracking exactly where we were last year at this point, which is just coincidence. Bond fund as well, as you know, we've talked about this. Our bond funds will continue to escalate because of the high interest rate environment right now in terms of our interest earnings there. And that is our only revenue source with bonds, is just the interest. We're not getting anything else from any other sources this year. And then capital projects, which is a reflection of the 5 cents that we have levied there, as well as a reimbursement for MIC. That's actually the large majority of that capital projects revenue. As you know, University of Central Missouri reimburses us for the cost of that lease for a portion of the MIC building. And so that's the majority of what you see reflected in capital projects. Moving across, nutrition, activity, before and after school services. Again, nutrition and activity really, a reflection of last year, except for, remember, in nutrition, we received our July or our June payment that we should have received in June. We received that in July. So that's why you see the percentage difference there. And then before and after school services, that will continue to grow. We may make a little bit of an adjustment on the revenue side there. So then moving down to expenses, operating, special revenue, you can see there as it tracks compared to last year, almost identical, 20.52% versus 20.49 when we combine the 2 funds. Operating is up a little bit, so we will monitor that, but really nothing significant at this point in the year, less than 1%. And keep in mind, sometimes the percentages are a reflection of the budget at that time of the year. So in January, we had a January amendment last year that sometimes equalizes those revenues and expenses. And then in Fund 2, We're actually down a little bit percentage-wise compared to last year, but overall, very even. Then going across debt service, bond, capital projects, again, those are more just debt service is set. We know what that will be. And bond and capital projects is just simply a reflection of the amount of work really that we've been able to get done through September of this fiscal year. So moving across, looking at nutrition services, you'll notice, again, percentage-wise tracks very closely to where we were at this point last year. Activity in the foundation is up slightly. That will vary throughout the year. We may be up a little, we may be down, and that's simply dependent upon the activity that's going on across all of our buildings, as well as some of the foundation activities. And then before and after school services, you'll notice that that is up slightly, but I'm really not concerned with that at this point, because overall for the year, if we move down to the bottom right under restricted funds and we look at that fund balance, the negative 360,918, you obviously notice it's much better than it was at this point last year. However, it is $31,000 better. That was $391,000 at the end of August. So we should see that track slowly. We know that we're not anticipating any of the federal funds that we received last year, but we should over time this year see that balance come down closer and closer to zero, which is a positive thing. It will just happen at a much slower rate this year. So then moving across from right to left at the bottom, just looking at activity again, remember that's just a reflection of how much, and in our activity funds, we budget the same amount in revenue and the same amount in expenses. That's not a fund. Neither one of those funds, those are restricted. We don't use those to look at our operating fund balance month to month in terms of our financial health. But nutrition services, it is a separate fund, but as we know, it was very robust last year in the reimbursements that we received. And so you see that reflected. And we will continue to monitor that as we go through the year. This is a more quote unquote normal year for us for nutrition services, although we do have a slight 40-cent adjustment that we're receiving, which is a little bit more reimbursement. So it's not back to where it was in 2019-20. It's still a little bit higher, but more of a what I think would be a normal year in nutrition services. So we'll watch that throughout the year. Overall, bottom left, you can see our current fund balance as it relates to last year at this time, up about 7.2 million from where we currently sat 12 months ago. So any questions on the revenue and expense report?
Nathan,
All right.
this one thing I want to highlight, Nathan's done a great job of this, of highlighting the importance of our fund balances, the operating balances. I just want to highlight the fact that, to date, we've spent 47.4 million in operating, and we've brought in a little over 28 million. And so we deficit spend, early in the fiscal year until we get to December and January, where, as we've talked about in the past, over 60% of our revenue, overall revenue, comes in through our property taxes. And so it's important that we maintain those strong balances. What we began the year with, over 30% is now down to 24%, and that number is going to drop as we move forward the next couple of months, but then we'll go up significantly in December and January. So just important that, and as people talk, as we look at our fund balances in June and July, we see that number of 30% or so. There's a reason we need those strong balances, and that's to maintain our cash flow and our ability to operate until we start receiving our property taxes in December and January.
All right, I believe next is our investment report. Not a lot has changed on the investment side for the month of September, but I would like to highlight some things because we've had some recent activity. So if you start at the top, you'll notice we had a CD mature last Friday. And just so you know, to preview kind of what we're looking at, I have requested those CDs that are coming off, as the one that just came off Friday, and as well as November 7th and November 9th. We are going to take that back into liquid and just hold it for a few weeks. We are waiting. We know from everything that we're seeing reported that the Fed is going to move again, likely 75 basis points, so 0.75%. So we're going to leave that liquid for just a few weeks, not too long, but then look to reinvest those CDs. Generally we are not, obviously when we're investing over a 5-year period, we don't look to time our investments that much because we're more interested in the laddered approach. However, when we have information that's right there in front of our face like this, we think it's wise to wait a few weeks and knowing that we'll get a better return of investment and we don't have to wait too long to get that. So you will see those CDs come off, but then eventually you'll see that money appear later on down the ladder as we structure those investments. So then going to the bottom, I also wanted to point out just a couple of items there. You'll notice that our total invested funds, again, compared to last year, are very strong. I also want to mention that in the MOCAT area, we have moved $5 million out of that and added $5 million into a liquid fund, which is a new product that is right now just over 3%. So we were able to add a little bit of new money, and then they allowed us to transfer some of the money that we had in the repurchase account. So that is something that you will see reflected in November when we close out October. Also want to mention just on those liquid accounts, the 2.78 for MOSIP is a reflection of end of the month. MOCAT is an average. Sometimes the way those are presented happens. What you see down below, the 2.44 in our bond proceeds, is more of an accurate reflection of the monthly average for those funds. So that brings me to the last point that I want to make. As you look down at the bottom at 2021 bond proceeds, the $39.4 million that we have invested in that's currently liquid, we did on October 5th make some term investments out of that 39.4 million. So we did 10 million in a 60-day, 10 million in 90, 10 million in 120. And those currently return 3.31, 3.66, and 3.86 respectively. Again, put them in more of a short-term investment, knowing that we will likely reinvest, but we can do that in an environment where, again, we know rates are going up in a couple of weeks. So trying to be strategic on that. We know we're waiting for that January 26th term investment to come off because there's some more opportunity there. But again, just kind of speaks to what we've talked about in the last couple of months, is that we do have a bit of an opportunity there with our current bond proceeds to generate a little bit more, which helps us with our projects and our ability to complete those and have a little bit of a balance left. 2020 bond proceeds, we will continue to spend that down. I would anticipate in late winter, early spring. It just depends on how fast some of these projects really get going, and then the billing that trails, which is 30 to 60 days usually, how fast we will spend. But certainly I do anticipate that those 2020 bond proceeds will be spent prior to the end of this fiscal year, certainly. And so it's, as we get closer, November, December, January, we'll have a better idea of when we will actually start getting into the 2021 bond proceeds. But eventually that line will go away. 2020 in this fiscal year at some point. So any questions on the investments?
Nathan, I have a question. I know I've asked you before about what the tax implications are for bond investments, but I don't think I've ever asked what the tax implications are on long-term capital gains for some of the like the CDs and things like that. So is that the same where if we make a certain amount, there's tax implications, or if we don't spend it on something, or are these just all, we don't owe any taxes because it's a public entity and that's what we're invested in?
Correct. Yep. The latter is exactly what it is. We do not have to pay the capital gains on the interest that we earn because as a public entity.
That's good. Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. All right. The last item is just our balance sheet, which again is kind of a recap of the revenue and expense report. If you look down there and can track throughout the year, one thing that I would highlight are our P-card payables. Again, as we know, this fluctuates month to month. Some months it might be 20 or 30,000 liability. That all depends on the billing cycle and when that hits. But also note that the fund operating balance, I haven't said this in a few months, but it's worth reminding. When you look at that total balance, the 56.194, and then if you were to compare that to the revenue and expense sheet that we saw earlier, if you take the number in the bottom left, the 56.194, and then you subtract out the liabilities, the 177,000, you will get the number that's on that revenue and expense sheet that we looked at earlier. So those operating as our operating balance. That's one of the things that we always look at each month to make sure that those two numbers match. When you subtract that, that should match what the operating balance is at the bottom. And so every month, that's part of the process that we go through. You'll also notice there at the bottom left, our first teacher transfer. And so as we go through every month, that fund balance adjustment will get higher and higher as we make those transfers each month. And then the other lines at the bottom, fund balance adjustment, that should always remain zero. You should see those dashes there throughout. And those match what we present on the revenue and expense report. So any questions on the balance sheet? All right. Thank you, everyone. That's all I have for September.
Just want to share a comment that Board Member Fritchie expressed at the Team Lee Summit, just expressing how well Nathan does in his role and how easy and simple he makes a very complex topic seem and feel. So he does a great job in his role, and we really appreciate his efforts. Moving on to section 4, Chromebook rotation. Dr. Whaley is going to share a few comments. I do want to say a few things prior to this. We've been presented with a possible opportunity that we'd like to share with the Finance Committee. There are some advantages to this opportunity, maybe some disadvantages. It would require us to move what we expect to be an FY24 expense into FY23. But there may be some advantages to doing that, and we just wanted to share that with you and get your feedback, get your input, and see if there's something you would like for us to pursue. Dr. Whaley?
Good morning, everybody. And again, can't emphasize enough, this is just, just the initial glance. And so looking for just feedback right now. Obviously, nothing's been decided. So talking about student Chromebooks, our existing student Chromebooks, the secondary, middle school and high school, those devices were purchased in the fall of 2018. So they were deployed in August of 2018. Elementary came along in December of 2018 or January of 2019. So they came along about 4 or 5 months later. So they're a little bit newer than our secondary devices. So kind of the current state is They are on a 4-year rotation currently, so we know next year we have to do a device replacement. Currently, I just looked at the Dell numbers. Since September, we've submitted roughly 420, 450 claims to Dell just because of the age of the device. Some of those are accidental damage, but we're seeing a lot of battery, system board failures, things like that. And that's typical for a device that's 4 years old that's in the hands of kids. So we've kind of started our process of going out and looking at what's the next Chromebook going to be, which vendor do we want to use. So like we typically do, and like we typically run our process, we talk with other districts, see what's out there. Are we happy with our current devices? Are we not? So we've started the process. So one of the vendors we talked with, which is Lenovo, and they would be sold through Converge One on a cooperative contract. We do a lot of work with Converge with our servers and storage, our data centers, things like that. But Lenovo kind of maybe possibly, and I don't know for sure, possibly over anticipated the number of orders throughout their client base. And so they're sitting on a stock of student Chromebooks that are very, very similar to what we currently have. So I think if you set them on the table side by side, it would be very difficult to tell the difference aside from the logo of the brand of the device. And so right now we're looking at our current Dell device that's in kids' hands. We pay roughly $429 for that device. And that includes Google licensing, accidental damage, and also kind of our repair services agreement with Dell. Lenovo has come in because they're sitting on a stock of devices. They could get us Chromebooks for roughly $199. But on top of that, we'd have to pay the Google license, which is another $30. And then this is where it gets interesting. They've got an accidental damage program also, like Dell does. And their service agreements are set up a little differently as well. So we're still looking at pricing on that. But we think we're going to be roughly $100, $120 cheaper than Dell, possibly. But with that, I was doing a lot of thinking last night. And again, this is all about feedback and just casual conversation. I think we also need to get really creative as a district and think about, before we go and pay possibly $60, $70, $80 to $100 for accidental damage and things like that on a device that might only cost $199. I think we need to get really aggressive with our thinking on that as we move into a model where instead of replacing Chromebooks every 4 years, which we know is very rough to do, we may be looking at a 3-year rotation. So we kind of need to do a cost analysis. So the question, just the proposal out to this group is, do we want to push ahead and possibly look at replacing middle school and high school at that $199 price point? Because it is going to be quite a bit of cost savings by doing that now, because if we were to wait and they run out of that stock, the devices are going to go up about $100 a piece. And so we can buy that 9,000 number, in the next few months. We can lock those in. But again, it's pulling that expenditure back into this fiscal year instead of waiting. I can tell you, are we going to make it till the end of the year with what we currently have? Yes. So is it urgent? No. We do have a lot of issues with what we currently have. So I wouldn't say it's urgent by any means, but it is an opportunity for a cost savings. Dr. Sheldon, did I say that everything okay with that?
Yes, thank you. President Campbell, Board Member Eslick, what questions or comments do you have for us?
So my first question is, when did this get added to the agenda? Because this weekend when I reviewed our agenda items, this wasn't on here. So first of all, I'm surprised, appreciate you bringing information, but I'm surprised at how this got on the agenda.
I apologize. I added it yesterday morning. And as I was reviewing the agenda for today, I noticed I had left that off, and so I apologize for adding that late.
And understand the conversation. It would probably be helpful to Board Member Eslick and I. I don't mind getting a ping and saying, hey, we've got an ad. Yeah, sure. Appreciate that.
I will definitely do that in the future. Thank you.
No, thank you. Appreciate that. So that was a lot of information really fast, because I think my first question is, are we certain So we knew with the 4-year rotation that there would be, I thought, an evaluation on our student devices as we were getting close to that 4-year cycle. And maybe that was just something I had in my head, maybe made up, I don't know. But an evaluation of, is Chromebook still the right decision for our district? And I'll pause there. Was I thinking that at some point, maybe in the past year or two, Dr. Whaley or Dr. Shelton, that we were thinking about a device review?
And I can start with that. So yes, there always is a device review. Obviously, cost is always a factor. So, for example, a neighboring district, they went with Mac across the district, and their initiative is $14 or $15 million. Whereas our last Chromebook initiative was around 4. So, you can automatically kind of narrow down what you're doing with devices. We have met last week with Dr. Buck's TAC, Teacher Advisory Committee, just to kind of toss out the idea of, what are you guys using in classrooms? What are you liking? Overwhelmingly, that group, they like Chromebooks because they're simple, they're low maintenance, and I think the tolerance right now for trying to switch a platform is pretty low. So for instance, if we throw that Mac discussion out and we simply say, are we going to go Windows or are we going to go Chrome? Windows would be a huge change and be a huge expense. So I think the cheapest Windows device we could get right now, you're going to be in that probably $600, $700, $800 price point, I would guess. And then it's going to come with a lot of training for staff to be able to support that in their classrooms. So, we just had a casual conversation in TAC the other day, and the teachers are very comfortable with where we are student device wise. Beyond that, I've talked with instruction and Melanie and her team to talk about, hey, this is coming. We've got, a decision to make. Of course, kind of back planning with recommendation. Let's say we wait till next year. We've got a decision to make that we need to get to the board by that, January, February mark. And so I know Melanie and the IoT have had some conversations as well. Dr. Shelton, are you aware of anything to add to that?
No, and you're right, Board President Campbell. Our plan to move forward is once again, as you said, getting feedback from staff. Also, one thing that Dr. Whaley's preparing is focus groups with our students to get their feedback. And so that definitely is in our plan and in our future. I would say just intuitively, based on what we know of the market and what we know of what we're doing instructionally with our students and what our staff support, it seems logical. It's likely, I think, that Chromebook would be a product that we would move forward with. And so once knowing that it's likely that this probably would be the product we would move forward with, and this opportunity presented itself, we just wanted to get this in front of you, because there is a likelihood that if I'll say, and not that we have a lot of pressure to move forward with this. We have a plan in place to make our rotation purchase next fiscal year. We just wanted to be due diligent in our efforts and be good fiscal stewards and say, hey, we do have an opportunity to save the district probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, about $1.7 million or so if we go this path. But we are prepared to move forward at our current pace of getting that feedback, going through the focus groups, and knowing that this opportunity still may be there in March or April, or it may not be there because their stock has dwindled away.
I appreciate so much you guys offering finding and offering up every opportunity that we can to save taxpayer dollars. That's a big thank you. So I think it feels like additional information, maybe Kevin, Dr. Whaley, maybe a report, maybe a slide or two that overviews, kind of that cost benefit analysis, maybe what you're thinking. If there are some options around that you could share with the board, because appreciate, I think our student voice on student devices is really important.
Mhm.
And knowing that you're going into a focus group conversation with a difference between 14 to $15 million for Macs versus 4 million for Chromebooks, that kind of is, if getting input of our students is important, and we
Sure.
want that. But if there are guardrails around that input and decisions, then we wouldn't want to go into those with saying, here's pie in the sky, what do you want?
Right.
And if there are decisions we can make to save some money and start some of that purchasing, appreciate you bringing that up. I just feel like we got a lot of information really quickly.
Right.
And that's always very tough for our board to make decisions around, for us to all get behind and support
Sure.
an administrative recommendation when we don't feel like we have all the facts that we need to have to feel comfortable, and when we feel rushed in that decision-making process. So
And I think today, and that's well put. I think today was just, before we package this direction, it's just, and it sounds like we, definitely bring back more information. I think that's what we were looking for is this even an idea we want to float? Or do we just want to stick to the original plan?
Right.
And Dr. Buck's asked some questions out to the right too, in case somebody hasn't seen that, or it's to the right for mine.
Yeah. And you're exactly right. Board President Campbell, by no means are we looking for a decision today. Actually, we're just looking for a little guidance. And I think, you've given us that. Dr. Whaley will put together some information, and I'm going to ask him to reach out to some students, pull some focus groups, get some input, and maybe, as you said, put some guardrails around it. What do you like about the Chromebooks? What don't you like? Because you're right. We don't want to dangle some carrot in front of our students that is not likely to occur. And that feels disappointing, disingenuous on our part. So, but we'll pull some students together, get some feedback regarding Chromebooks, as well as some other ideas on how we can maybe enhance their experience with the technology that we use. But then package that up and bring that to you, to either the finance committee or to the entire board in November as maybe a topic at a work session.
great. Board member, it's like anything that you might want to add on there?
Sorry, I was making sure I was unmuted. I'm working from 2 devices right now because my computer will not work on my audio. So I agree there was a lot of information I was trying to feverishly write. So I definitely think trying to get everything kind of collected and presented will definitely help guide the conversation. It's certainly worth talking about and trying to figure out if that's a good option for us.
Right.
One question or consideration that I have is just the curiosity of the K to 3 range on Chromebooks. Since we only did that a couple of years ago, has there been efforts to get feedback from educators and parents on how that's working for the younger kids? Because I can only speak for myself as a parent. Personally, I don't care for having my youngest kids with Chromebooks.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just one person. So I'm just curious if, that's something that has been investigated to see, we implemented it, we've given it a few years. Is this a good thing? Is it more of a distraction? Are we creating more opportunities for our kids to have less of an attention span because we're providing them another instant opportunity for gratification? So I'm just curious, is that something we've done, we plan to do? Could we do it?
Yeah, so actually K12 went into place even 8 years ago with the original one-to-one deployment. So this is actually year 8. The year 4, before the last replacement, we did a lot of working with constituent groups, teachers, parents, to talk about, because at the time is the Chromebook the right device? So, or should it be a tablet? So it was interesting that our teachers, that initial 4 years, it kind of started out with, oh my gosh, trying to get kids logged in, are we going to use them or not? The feedback, again, 4 years ago was, yes, we want them to have a device, a Chromebook's working, because I think our greatest hiccup right now is trying to get a kindergartner to type their login in. That is a very difficult thing. I think any kindergarten teacher will tell you that. But once they get through that first quarter, first semester where kids can then, log in, they are using the devices at school, and are, first grade, second grade, third grade, by putting the kids on the devices sooner, even though we're not really, keyboarding in the traditional sense, kids are learning to navigate in some pretty advanced ways, and they're actually able to type or record their input or things like that. I know at the younger grades, we see a lot of, record yourself reading, listen back. So I think it's less of an input and more of a, self-communication, or, get yourself comfortable presenting type environment with the littles. So we did quite a bit of that 4 years ago.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I was just curious because I'm obviously just one parent, and I just didn't know what the feedback was from the people who actually have to use them in the classroom with the students and how that goes. But you're right.
Absolutely.
The logging on is definitely the most difficult part for the little kids.
Yes.
Board Member Eslick, would it be beneficial if we worked with Dr. Barger and maybe had a presentation on what our K1, 2, 3 students are doing with their devices?
Sure. I may not be the only one who's curious about that.
Sure.
So yeah,
Sure.
that would be very informative.
Very good. So we'll reach out to Dr. Barger and pull something together for you.
We can do that.
Thank you.
I do think, too, if I could just add one more ask, Dr. Whaley, as you're thinking about focus groups and students, I know we have the group of parents around, struggling readers. If there are opportunities within our folks that, have IEPs, have 504s, if there were some opportunities to pull in students across diversity in that space, I think that might be really helpful and beneficial as well.
Sure.
Okay. Thank
Awesome.
you. Great.
Well, thank you for allowing us to bring this topic to the committee and giving us your feedback. Very helpful as we move forward.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate the hard work that you all put into this. It's important.
Absolutely.
And the last item, 4.02, the November Finance Committee meeting date. We, Mr. Holder and I will be out of town on November 16th, that Wednesday, and was curious as to your thoughts about holding our Finance Committee meeting on November 15th, that Tuesday, rather than that Wednesday. Now, we can definitely host the meeting on that Wednesday, and we'd be available. We could log in and obviously remotely from where we will be, but also just wanted to throw that out, the opportunity to meet on Tuesday rather than Wednesday. Do you have a thought or an opinion on that?
The 15th. Go ahead, Heather. Go ahead.
I have a conflict because I'm on the Lee Summit Education Foundation board, and that board meeting is always the day before the Finance Committee meeting.
Right.
I think it's typically over by 9:30, but I know that doesn't really work with the schedule. Right. So again, one person, but I do have a conflict.
Yeah.
I could do the 14th if that was an option. Board Member Eslick, is that an option? I don't know with Dr. Shelton if that's an option for the team. The 14th.
Sure. Let me pull up my calendar real quick. That would work for me. Board Member Eslick, does Monday the 14th work for you?
Yes, I can make that work.
All right. Well, let's tentatively plan for Monday the 14th, November 14th for our next meeting. Reach out and we'll maybe compare some calendars and see if there's any other conflicts. But at first glance, I think that'll work, and I appreciate your flexibility in scheduling.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, that concludes this month's Finance Committee meeting. I appreciate everyone's time and efforts. Please reach out if you have any questions or comments or anything we can do for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.